My sister used to work at Hargrove Mall. That's the thing nobody asks when I tell this story. They want to know about the cameras. They want to know about the lights coming on inside a building that's had no power since Clinton was in office. But nobody ever asks why I was watching in the first place. And that part matters more than any of the rest of it. That part is the whole reason this happened to me, and not somebody else. Carrie worked the Auntie Anne's pretzel counter on the upper level, East Wing, right next to the fountain with the fake copper pennies glued to the basin so kids couldn't fish them out. She was 17. I was 24, and I was supposed to pick her up that Friday night, October 9th, 1998, and I didn't. I was at a bar in Decatur with a girl whose last name I genuinely cannot remember, and my pager went off twice, and I ignored it both times because I was an idiot who was 24 and thought whatever it was could wait. The mall closed that same night. Not like an announced closure, not a sign on the door and a liquidation sale. Something happened in the East Wing around 9:45. They evacuated the building, and they never opened it again. Official story was a structural concern. Gas leak, asbestos. Depending on which county official you cornered, you got a different answer. And none of those answers ever explained why 17 employees and 4 shoppers went in for the evacuation headcount, and 16 employees and 4 shoppers came out. Carrie was the one who didn't come out. So yeah, that's why I was watching the cameras. That's the whole entire reason. I need to back up a little, because without the middle part, this all sounds crazy. Just a grieving guy, losing his mind, staring at a dead building for 25 years. Which, okay, fair. But there's more to it than that. After Carrie disappeared, there was an investigation. Obviously. Missing persons, then the county sheriff, then eventually a state-level task force that spent 11 months and a considerable amount of taxpayer money concluding that Caroline Marie Pelham, age 17, had likely exited through an unmapped service corridor during the chaos of the evacuation, encountered some kind of accident in the drainage infrastructure south of the parking lot, and her body had been carried off by water. Case classified as accidental death, presumed. No remains recovered. My mother never believed it. I never believed it. My mother died in 2011, still waiting for something to change. And after that, I kept believing it alone, which is a specific kind of lonely I don't have a good word for. Here's something about Hargrove Mall that most people don't know. It was never torn down, never converted into a fulfillment warehouse or a mega church or a community college satellite campus the way every other dead mall in the state eventually got repurposed. It just sat there. The developer who owned the property went through 3 bankruptcies and 2 ownership transfers. And somewhere inside all that legal wreckage, the building got stuck in a lien dispute that nobody ever fully resolved. By the time anyone with real money looked at it, the asbestos remediation estimate was steep enough that it was simply cheaper to leave it standing, pay the minimal property tax, and let it decay on its own schedule. Which meant it was still there, 25 years later. Still standing at the intersection of Route 9 and Millhaven Road, its beige concrete panels gone the color of old teeth, the J.C. Penney anchor sign still bolted to the east facade, even though half the letters had fallen away, leaving it reading J.P.N.Y. My buddy Travis said that sounded like a rapper name. Travis was right. I drove past it more often than I probably should have. It was sort of on the way to everywhere if you took the back route, which I always took, and I'd slow down a little each time, look up at the upper-level windows on the east wing, think about Carrie, feel that particular hollow ache, and drive on. This went on for a long time. Most of my adult life, if I'm being straight about it. The camera thing started 3 years ago, and not because I planned it. It wasn't some organized surveillance operation I'd been quietly assembling for months. It started because a city council meeting in March put the mall back on the local agenda. New developer. Clean enough title. Preliminary demolition estimate. They were finally going to knock it down within 18 months. And I read about it on the local paper's website at 2 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table feeling something I genuinely hadn't expected to feel. Panic. I know how that sounds. I know that rationally the building isn't Carrie, and tearing down a building doesn't erase a person. Every therapist I've seen, and I've seen a few, said approximately that same thing. They were right, clinically correct. But here's what they couldn't quite account for. While that building was still standing, there was still a place in the world where she had been. I could drive past it and know she had stood inside those walls. The Auntie Anne's counter was still in there somewhere, dark and dried out, but physically present. The fountain with the glued down pennies. The bench where she used to eat her pretzel scraps and text me stupid memes. All of it still existed in the world, and once the building came down, it would be gone in a different, more final way than she was already gone. So I drove out there that same night. March, cold and clear, about 2:30 in the morning. I parked at the far end of the lot and sat looking at the building for a while. And while I was looking, I noticed something I hadn't thought about in years. The security camera housings, still mounted, along the roofline above every entrance, and along the east wing upper level exterior, 4 of them in a row. Old weatherized housings, the big boxy square kind from the 90s, gray and sun-bleached, obviously not functional. Obviously. But I thought about it the whole drive home, and the thought that kept circling back was simple. What if they are? Not wishful thinking. More like, weird. Let me actually look into that. Because I'd spent years collecting whatever scraps of information I could find about the night Carrie disappeared. And one thing I knew was that Hargrove Mall had a security management contract with a company called Vantage Watch Solutions. Vantage Watch dissolved in 2003, messily, and there were forum threads on an abandoned places hobbyist site where urban explorers had discussed the building. One of them, username kilowatt_Greg, had written in 2019 that the building still had an active low-voltage line running from the municipal grid because the lien agreement required it for fire suppression system maintenance. The county mandated it. The building was technically still insured, an active low-voltage line. Old analog security cameras run on almost nothing. I know enough about electrical systems to be dangerous, as my ex-wife would happily confirm. And I knew enough to understand that if those cameras had never been properly decommissioned, if Vantage Watch dissolved before anyone completed the shutdown paperwork, and if there was still current running through that building's fire suppression circuit, there was at least a theoretical chance some of those housings were still doing something. Not transmitting to any active monitoring station, but maybe recording to a local loop, or, if the system had been upgraded to the early analog over IP hybrid that some commercial facilities were adopting in the mid-90s, maybe even pinging a dormant network address. This is where my job becomes relevant, and not in the way people usually assume. I'm a network systems technician, have been for 16 years. I maintain legacy infrastructure for municipal clients, which is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds, except for the times you stumble onto what we call ghost systems. Legacy hardware that's technically still alive on a network, because nobody ever formally shut it down. Somebody installed a system in 1994. The managing company folded. Nobody ever sent the kill signal, and the hardware just keeps quietly sitting there on the network, broadcasting to nothing, waiting. Ghost systems are more common than people think. Hospitals, schools, old commercial buildings. They're everywhere if you know how to look. I knew how to look. It took about 6 weeks of off-hours digging to get anywhere useful. Public records request to get the name of the fire suppression maintenance contractor, trace the municipal utility account, map the low-voltage circuit allocation, then find Vantage Watch's old network range before dissolution, which involved a lot of dead ends, and one genuinely helpful retired technician named Dale, who had worked Vantage Watch's install crew in 1995 and remembered the Hargrove job specifically because it was the last big commercial install he did before the company started cutting corners on everything. Dale remembered they'd upgraded to an early hybrid analog IP system in 1997. Remembered the IP range. Didn't know if anything was still on it, but gave me a place to start. The night I found the first live camera address, I was at my kitchen table around 11:30 with a cup of coffee gone cold. I ran a sweep of the old range expecting nothing, the way I'd expected nothing every night for 6 weeks. And then one address came back with a response. Not a clean ping, more like a knock. Something on the other end heard me, acknowledged it, but didn't open the door. My hand started doing something strange, not quite shaking, more like a fine vibration, because some part of me already understood that this was real, and I hadn't actually prepared for real. I got the feed open at 12:04 in the morning, a Tuesday in early May. Camera 4, East Wing, upper level exterior. The exact camera with the clearest sightline to the roof section above the anti-ants. The image was grainy and greenish, the way old low-light cameras go. The timestamp burned into the lower right corner was frozen, which happens with these old systems when the internal clock battery dies. The feed runs live, but the clock stops. This one was stopped at 11:47 p.m., October 9th, 1998. The night Carrie disappeared. I closed the laptop. Just closed it. Got up, walked to the sink, ran cold water over my wrists the way you do when you feel like you might go down. Stood there for a while, then went back and opened it again. The feed was still there. The timestamp still frozen. The parking lot outside the East Wing entrance was empty and dark, and the building looked exactly as dead as it was supposed to be. I watched it for an hour. Nothing happened. I told myself the frozen clock was a battery issue, completely explainable, and the fact that it was frozen on that specific date was the kind of thing that would hollow me out if I let it. So I wasn't going to let it. Over the next 2 nights, I found 3 more live camera addresses. Camera 1, main south entrance. Camera 7, upper level interior concourse, East Wing. Camera 11, interior lower level center court. The big open atrium below the food court. All 4 timestamps frozen at 11:47 p.m., October 9th, 1998. That made sense, I told myself. Battery fails, clock stops. If all 4 went offline at roughly the same moment, maybe during a power fluctuation that night, they'd all freeze at the same reading. Explainable. Then, on the 5th night of watching, at 2:09 in the morning, the lights inside Hargrove Mall came on. Not all of them. Not bright. But camera 11, the atrium feed, went from a grainy dark nothing to a grainy greenish something. And the something was light, low, and sourceless and wrong, spreading through the center court of a building with no commercial power connection. And in that light, for the first time, I could see the atrium clearly. The stores were open. I need to be precise about what I mean by that, because I know your first instinct is to picture lights blazing, people moving around, a full ghost mall running like it's 1994, and the Sparrow is doing a lunch rush. That's not what I mean. Not yet. What I mean is that the security gates were up. You remember those? The accordion metal gates every mall store pulled down at closing, the kind that folded back into themselves during business hours and locked to a pin in the floor. Every store in Hargrove had them. standard commercial hardware. On camera 11, in that low, sourceless light, every gate on the lower level atrium was fully retracted. Every storefront open-faced. Dark inside each one, but open. The way a store looks at 7 in the morning when the opening manager has already come through and rolled everything up, but the staff hasn't arrived. Ready. The mall looked ready. I sat with that longer than I want to admit. The feed was live, I was nearly certain of it, because the light quality shifted slightly every few minutes, the way real low light does, not the static flatness of a recorded loop. And there was grain movement in the image consistent with the air disturbance a large empty building makes when its temperature shifts. I've spent 16 years looking at camera feeds. I know the difference between a loop and a live image. This was live, but the gates were up in a building locked and abandoned for 25 years. My first rational explanation was urban explorers, Kilowatt_Greg and his crowd, the abandoned places hobbyists who'd discussed the building online. Maybe someone had gotten inside and manually retracted the gates. That would explain the gates. It wouldn't explain the light, because urban explorers use flashlights and headlamps, not whatever this ambient glow was. But I filed the light under old infrastructure behaving strangely and held on to the explorer theory, because it was the most solid thing I had. I almost convinced myself completely. Got about 80% there. Then camera 7 moved. Camera 7 was the upper-level interior concourse, east wing. Fixed mount, no motorized function, no reason to move. But at 2:23 in the morning it panned, slow and deliberate, roughly 40 degrees to the right. The way a camera moves when someone's operating it remotely, or a motorized mount is following a programmed sweep. The pan stopped and held on the upper-level concourse in that same sourceless light, and it showed me the Auntie Anne's counter. Still there, completely intact. The pretzel case, the menu board, the counter surface, and on the wall behind it the yellow and brown branded sign I hadn't seen in 25 years, but recognized like a toothache, immediate and physical, and hitting somewhere I hadn't protected. I pushed back from the table, stood up, said something out loud in my kitchen that I don't remember, but something, because the room needed a sound in it, and my breathing wasn't cutting it. The camera should not have moved. Fixed security mounts in a building with no active management contract don't move. Even with residual power in the system, there was no one to issue a pan command. Unless the sweep was hard-coded on a timer, a pre-programmed patrol sequence from 1998 that had somehow kept cycling in the dark without anyone watching. Theoretically possible. Old systems do strange things. I've seen plenty of strange things with completely mundane explanations behind them. But the pan had stopped on the Auntie Anne's counter, and I needed to know whether that was coincidence. I went to bed around 4 and didn't sleep in any real sense. I lay in the dark, turning it over. The frozen timestamps, the rolled-up gates, the camera pan. The question I kept returning to was whether what I was seeing was happening now or then. Whether the cameras were showing me the building as it currently existed, meaning something or someone had been inside rolling up those gates in the dark, or whether I was looking at footage from the night it closed, a recording that had been looping on a dead network for 25 years with a corrupted timestamp displaying as live. The second option was less frightening. A very old recording doing something technically unusual was a solvable problem. Documentation. Something I could file with the county as part of the ongoing records surrounding Carrie's disappearance. New evidence of activity at 11:47 p.m. on October 9th, preserved on a ghost system. That would have been something real I could give my mother's memory. So the next morning I called Dale. He'd given me his number and told me to call if I found anything, Said he was bored and 71 and his wife was tired of him reorganizing the garage. I gave him the technical rundown, not the part about Carrie. Not yet. Just the facts. Live feed, 4 cameras, frozen timestamps, a motorized pan on a fixed mount. He was quiet a moment, then said that if the sweep timer had been hard-coded into the camera controller unit rather than the software, and if the controller had battery backup that somehow survived, unlikely but not impossible depending on the make, it could still be running its patrol sequence. I asked him about the light source on the atrium feed. He didn't have an answer. Old fluorescent ballasts do odd things when power fluctuates through a partially dead circuit, he said. Partial illumination, cycling, effects that look sourceless because the fixture isn't fully activating. He'd seen it in old buildings. He sounded like a man trying to be useful while not quite believing his own reasoning. Then I asked whether the system could have been recording continuously since 1998. Storage capacity for a setup like that would have run out in weeks, he said. No cloud backup. It would have been writing to local hard drives, and the drives would have either filled and stopped or, if the system was configured to overwrite on a loop, kept recording by erasing everything before. Meaning whatever was on those cameras now was current, not archived. Current. The gates up, the light in the atrium, the camera swinging itself toward the pretzel counter. All of it happening now. I thanked Dale and sat in my truck in my own driveway for 20 minutes doing absolutely nothing. That night I watched all 4 feeds at once, a simple quad display tiled on my laptop, nothing elaborate. Started around 11. For the first hour, nothing different from previous nights. Dark, grainy, still. Timestamps all frozen at 11:47. At 12:04, same as the first night, the atrium light came on. Not building gradually, not stuttering up the way failing fluorescents do. Just on. Switched. And with camera 1 running now, the south entrance exterior, I could see through the outer glass doors that a faint glow was visible from outside the building. The light was physically real, present inside the structure, not a camera artifact. Something was generating illumination in a building with no commercial power. I wrote it down. I'd started keeping a legal pad next to the laptop by then, logging times, cameras, observations, and possible explanations. Because writing things down made me feel like I was doing something methodical instead of just sitting in my kitchen, coming slowly apart. The possible explanations column was getting shorter every night. On camera 7, the east wing upper level, the mall looked different at 12:04 than it had during the first hour of watching. Not dramatically, not furniture rearranged or walls shifted. Subtle. The gate on the store directly across from the Auntie Anne's counter, which had appeared down earlier, was now fully rolled up. And on the counter itself, showing clearly in camera 7's new panned angle, there were shapes I was certain hadn't been there before. Small, scattered, irregular. The resolution was old and the light was wrong, and I couldn't make them out precisely. But they were there. I thought about Carrie picking at her break-time pretzel scraps, pulling pieces apart while she texted. A specific habit, particular to her. I let myself think about it for about 4 seconds, and then made myself stop, because that road doesn't lead anywhere I can come back from easily. On camera 11, the atrium, I saw movement for the first time on that third night of watching. Not a person. I want to be clear about that. Not a figure crossing the floor. Movement as in one of the chairs at the food court tables had shifted position between one moment and the next, the way a chair shifts when someone pulls it out to sit down. I hadn't seen it move. I'd looked at camera 7 for maybe 40 seconds, and when I looked back at the atrium feed, the chair was at a different angle. I rewound the buffer, watched the 40-second window, watched it again and again. The chair didn't move. It was simply in one position, then in another, with no transition between them. I watched that clip probably 15 times. Same result every time. That chair was what finally pushed my thinking somewhere different. Not whether I was seeing now versus 1998 anymore, but whether the cameras were showing me something that didn't move through time the way I did. Not a recording of the past, and not a live feed of the present, but something that occupied positions without traveling between them. Skipped, jumped, existed in a place without having arrived there. I know how that sounds. I'm a network systems technician who services municipal broadband infrastructure, drives a 7-year-old Chevy Colorado, and shops at the same grocery store every Sunday morning. I don't naturally think in those terms. It took me a long time to let the idea sit without arguing myself out of it. But I kept coming back to Carrie, specifically to the thing about her disappearance that never fit the county's drainage accident conclusion, the thing I'd turned over in my head for 25 years without resolution. The evacuation head count was taken at the south entrance staging area. 16 employees came out, but 3 of Carrie's co-workers from the Auntie Anne's counter told investigators they had evacuated with her, walked right next to her down the east wing toward the south entrance, been in the same group the whole way. And then she wasn't at the staging area. She hadn't turned back. She hadn't stopped. She'd been in the group, and then she hadn't, and not one person could identify when the transition happened. Present in position A, then present in position B. No observable transition. I wrote that in the notebook and stared at it for a long time. On the 4th night, I found a 5th camera feed, camera 9. I'd missed it in my initial sweep because its address was allocated slightly outside the range Dale had given me, off by a single octet. My error. When I pulled it up, I saw it covered a space I had no reference point for, from the assessor records or any public photograph of the building. A narrower space, a corridor or service walkway of some kind, filmed from a high bird's eye angle, looking straight down, the way you mount cameras in service passages. Long and straight and narrow. The sourceless light was present there too, at 12:04, when I first accessed the feed. The corridor was not empty. A figure stood in it, small, motionless, facing away from the camera. The resolution was the worst of any of the 5 feeds, the bird's eye distance and the green-gray grain making detail almost impossible, so I can't tell you I saw anything clearly. What I can tell you is that the figure's proportions were slight, that it appeared to be wearing something light-colored, that it held itself with the particular stillness of someone waiting rather than someone unaware of being watched. It was standing in the East Wing corridor, approximately 40 feet from where the Auntie Anne's counter would have been. I watched it for 11 minutes without it moving. Then, camera 7 panned again, the same slow motorized sweep as before, and stopped at the Auntie Anne's counter. And on the counter, clearer now in the light than they'd been the night before, were the shapes I hadn't been able to make out. Pretzel pieces. Small, scattered, irregular, pulled apart by hand. My notebook was open, and my pen was in my hand, and I didn't write anything for a long time. I just looked at all 4 feeds tiled on the screen. The atrium with the pulled-out chair, the East Wing concourse with every gate rolled up, the corridor with the still, waiting figure, the pretzel counter with the pieces scattered across it, like someone had just stepped away for a moment. All 5 timestamps reading 11:47 p.m., October 9th, 1998. I picked up my phone and pulled up the county demolition timeline for Hargrove Mall. Preliminary site work was scheduled to begin in 11 weeks. 11 weeks. I closed the laptop, then opened it almost immediately, because I'd known from the first night. Some part of me had always known. that whatever was on these cameras wasn't something I was going to hand off to somebody else. It wasn't evidence for a file. It was Carrie, my sister, or something that had her, or something that was her, in a way I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. On camera 9, the figure had not moved, but it had turned around. My body knew before my brain did. My stomach dropped before I'd consciously processed what I was seeing. Some animal part of me registering the change before my thoughts caught up. The figure that had stood with its back to the camera for 11 unmoving minutes was now facing the lens. It hadn't moved through the footage I could rewind. Same as the chair. Position A, then position B, nothing between them. I sat completely still for probably 3 full minutes. Not thinking, just looking, waiting to see if it would do anything else. It didn't. It stood there facing up at the camera, and I sat there looking down at the screen, and we held that arrangement for a long time. Then camera 11, the atrium feed, showed me something new. The food court seating area. I'd noted the single pulled-out chair on night 3 and again on night 4, but I'd been too focused on camera 9 to look at the atrium closely. When I shifted my attention there, I counted 6 chairs now, pulled out from 6 different tables, not clustered together but spread across the seating area, the way 6 unrelated people would scatter if each chose their own spot. The way an actual food court looks at 11:30 on an ordinary Tuesday. Random, individual. I wrote down the number 6, drew a small circle around it, felt faintly ridiculous for drawing the circle, looked at the screen again, and stopped feeling ridiculous. 6 chairs. The figure on camera 9, now facing the lens. Pretzel pieces on the counter. The mall lit and open and waiting. I tried to approach it the way I'd approach a network anomaly at work. Document it. Map it. Find the underlying logic. Because here's what I know professionally. What 16 years of working with systems has taught me. Everything has a logic. Even broken things. Especially broken things. When a network malfunctions, the malfunction follows the shape of the original design. It breaks in ways consistent with how it was built. You find the pattern in the failure, and the pattern shows you what the system was meant to do. So what was this system meant to do? The mall was supposed to open at 10 in the morning and close at 9 at night. That was its entire design. Open, receive people, run through its daily cycle, close, reset. And in 1998, something interrupted that cycle mid-operation. Not at closing time, at 11:47 p.m., after closing, after the staff was supposed to be gone. Whatever the mall had become was still stuck in that operational logic, frozen at the moment of interruption, still running its open mall cycle because it never received the signal to stop, still receiving. That word landed and I put down my pen. Still receiving. Still in the part of its cycle where it takes people in. And I thought about what Dale had said, that the recording system would have been overriding on a loop, meaning whatever the cameras showed was current, not preserved. The mall wasn't showing me 1998. It was doing this tonight. Had been doing it every night I'd watched, and probably every night for 25 years. The timestamps weren't frozen at 11:47 because the clocks failed. They were frozen there because whatever this was, whatever the mall had become, was still inside that moment. Still operating from it. Running its open logic from the exact instant of interruption. And never, not once in 25 years, moving past it. 10 weeks until the demolition equipment showed up. I looked at camera 9, and the figure stood there looking back. And I thought about my sister in that East Wing corridor at 17, waiting inside an 11:47 that never ended. And I had to get up and go to the kitchen and turn on every light and press both palms flat on the counter just to feel something solid and present and real. I didn't close the laptop. I left it running and stood in the kitchen and breathed and worked through the next thing very carefully. The next thing was that I had to go there. I know. Every person I've told any version of this to has asked the same question. Why would you? Why would you go to the building? But here's what that question leaves out. Carrie, 17 years old, and I didn't pick her up because I was at a bar with a girl whose last name I can't remember, and she walked down the east wing toward the south entrance, and then wasn't at the south entrance, and she may have been inside some kind of looped-open impossible moment for 25 years, with 11 weeks left before the walls around her got knocked into rubble. If she were your sister, you'd go. You'd go regardless of everything. It took me 4 days to make the decision, and 3 more to get ready, which was partly practical, and partly me being honest with myself about how scared I was. Not nervous, not creeped out. Scared in a deep body way, the kind that settles into your joints and makes food taste faintly like copper. I had the building layout from the assessor records, a rough sense of where the cameras were mounted and where the service corridors ran relative to them, and a work tablet charged and loaded with all 5 feeds running simultaneously. A flashlight with a magnetic base I use for utility work. My phone. Bolt cutters for the perimeter fencing, which was trespassing, and I knew it, and I went anyway. I drove out on a Wednesday night in early May, about a week after I found the figure on camera 9. Got there around 11:15. Parked on the service road behind the old Sears anchor on the west end, out of sight from Route 9. Sat in the truck, looked at the building, thought about turning around maybe 6 times. Didn't turn around. The fence was easy. The south-facing service gate chain was old, and the bolt cutters went through it quickly. And then I was in the loading dock area behind the east wing. It smelled like old asphalt and something else. Something damp and organic I chose not to investigate further. And I had the flashlight on, and I was moving toward the building. The east wing loading dock entrance was a heavy commercial steel door with a bar handle on the inside and a key cylinder on the outside. Should have been locked. It wasn't latched, not broken, not forced open, just sitting barely off its frame, a half-inch of dark showing at the edge. I stood in front of it for about 30 seconds and then pulled it open. The smell reached me before anything else. Old air. Not rot exactly, not the smell of decay, but the smell of a room sealed at a specific moment, as though the air inside had a date on it. Old concession sugar and floor wax and something metallic under both of those. The smell of a building frozen mid-breath. My flashlight beam ran down the service corridor. Low ceiling, bare concrete block walls, and my footsteps made a flat, absorbed sound with no echo, which is not what empty buildings do. Empty buildings echo. This one took the sound and held it. I checked the tablet. All 5 feeds up. I was on the east wing service level, roughly below and behind camera 9's position. On camera 11, the atrium feed, I could see the food court seating area. 12 chairs now, pulled from 12 tables. The number had doubled since I'd last watched from home, and I wrote it down even though my handwriting wasn't what you'd call steady. On camera 9, the corridor was empty. The figure was gone. I stopped walking the moment I registered that. Gone from the camera meant somewhere I couldn't see, which was worse than knowing exactly where it was. And the only direction it could reasonably have gone from that corridor position was deeper into the east wing service area, which was roughly the direction I was heading. I stood there and took stock. Go forward toward the Auntie Anne's level or go back to the truck. That was the whole list. Going back meant letting the demolition crew knock the building down in 11 weeks without knowing what was inside, without knowing if any version of Carrie existed in there in any form. I'd lived with not knowing for 25 years. I was done with it. I went forward. The service corridor connected to a narrow stairwell that the building layout placed directly behind the East Wing retail level. The walls were close in the stairwell, the ceiling low, and when I put my hand on the metal railing, it was warm. Not ambient temperature warm. Warm the way a railing is warm when someone has been holding it. I pulled my hand back and kept my flashlight on the wall and went up the stairs and came through a push door into the East Wing upper-level retail corridor. The sourceless light was real. I need to say that plainly because it matters. For weeks I'd watched it on the cameras and told myself, fluorescent anomaly, power fluctuation artifact, something with a mundane explanation once I was physically present. There was no mundane explanation. The light was simply there. Low and even and greenish-gray, originating from no fixture I could identify, not throwing the hard shadows a point source would cast, just present the way light is present at the bottom of a swimming pool seen from below the surface. Sourceless. Even. Wrong in a way that was difficult to name. And in that light, the mall was open. Literally open. The accordion security gates on every storefront fully retracted. The Foot Locker across from the pretzel counter. The Walden Books 3 doors down. The Claire's accessories store where Carrie used to buy the cheap earrings that turned her earlobes green. Every one of them open-fronted and dark inside, waiting. The display windows still had merchandise in them. 25 years of dust on everything. But the mannequins still posed. The sale signs still visible in faded neon, and something in the arrangement of it all that felt less like preservation and more like anticipation. Come in. We're ready for you. My tablet showed Camera 7's feed, and I could see myself on it, small and greenish, standing in the corridor with my flashlight cutting a bright cone through the sourceless ambient glow. I watched myself on screen for a moment, and it was profoundly disorienting, like finding a photograph of yourself you have no memory of being taken. I moved toward the Auntie Anne's counter slowly, not stealthily, just carefully, because my legs were technically working, but communicating their reservations. The counter came into view and the pretzel pieces were there. Real. Physical. Scattered across the laminate surface exactly as the camera had shown them. And when I brought the flashlight beam across them, I could see they weren't 25-year-old food. Not fossilized. Not the desiccated residue of something left in 1998. They looked like they'd been there for a few hours. Maybe less. I didn't touch them. I wanted to. I didn't. I wrote fresh in the notebook, underlined it twice, and looked around the counter for anything else. On the back counter near the pretzel warmer sat a paper cup, also recently placed by the look of it. Inside the cup was a pen, a regular ballpoint, blue ink. Nothing remarkable about it, except that its barrel design was clearly current manufacture. Nothing about it belonged to 1998. Someone had set it down on the back counter of the Auntie Anne's at Hargrove Mall in the recent past. I checked Camera 7 on my tablet. It showed me standing at the counter, looking at the cup. I raised my hand. The figure on screen raised its hand a half-second later, normal signal delay. I felt briefly, almost absurdly reassured by this. Then, Camera 9 showed me the corridor again. The figure was back. Same position, same bird's-eye angle. But it wasn't alone now. A second figure stood slightly behind it, and to the left. Taller, both of them facing up at the camera. Neither moving. The taller figure held something at its side, something hanging from one hand that Camera 9's resolution wouldn't let me identify. I looked at the service access door to my left. Closed. No light showing at the bottom. I looked at my tablet, and the two figures stood there perfectly still. I took 3 steps toward the door, and then I stopped. Because from the other side of it came a sound. Not a dragging sound, not the grinding horror movie approach you've been trained to expect. This was quieter than that, and, because of its quietness, considerably worse. It was the sound of someone pulling apart a piece of bread. Soft, specific, domestic. A small tearing sound that had absolutely no business existing in a dead mall at 2 in the morning. I stood in the sourceless light with my flashlight and my tablet and my notebook, and I listened to it, and I did not move. Then it stopped, and from the other side of that door, a voice said my name. My sister's voice. Exact. Not an approximation. Not a close reconstruction your grieving brain generously fills in. My name, in Carrie's voice, the one I hadn't heard in 25 years, but had never lost. The way certain sounds just live in you permanently, and don't erode the way ordinary memories do. I would have known that voice anywhere. I did not open the door. The honest version of that moment is complicated. Part of me didn't open it because I was genuinely, deeply afraid. Every muscle locked between fight and flight with neither winning. But underneath the fear, something else was operating. Something I couldn't have put into words right then. But that was working steadily below the surface, telling me that opening that door was not going to give me Carrie. Whatever was on the other side had learned her voice the way a recording learns a voice, and was playing it back, and the thing doing the playing was not her. I backed away from the door. 2 steps. 3. Keeping my eyes on it, and my flashlight on the gap at the bottom where I could confirm there was no light on the other side. Then I turned and moved back down the East Wing corridor the way I'd come, fast but controlled, because running in an unfamiliar dark building and going down over something would be a different kind of problem. Back through the push door, down the stairwell, into the service corridor below. I put my back against the concrete block wall and breathed. Tablet, camera 9, 1 figure now. The taller one was gone. The smaller one remained, still facing the camera, motionless in the corridor directly above me, the one I'd just come from. I looked at the push door at the top of the stairwell. Closed. The figure on the tablet, still upstairs. I moved toward the loading dock exit. I haven't told this next part to many people, because I usually lose the room somewhere around 2 figures and a voice, and what follows requires more of a person's credulity than most are willing to extend. But you asked for the whole thing. I did not leave the building that night. I reached the loading dock entrance, the one I'd come in through, the one that had been sitting unlatched when I arrived. It was latched now, not locked. The mechanism moved fine when I pressed the bar. The hardware functioned, but the door didn't open. It shifted slightly in its frame the way a door shifts against significant counterpressure, and then held. I pushed harder. Same result. Whatever was on the other side wasn't a lock. It was weight, and it was enough that a bar handle in a narrow corridor wasn't going to overcome it. I breathed and didn't let myself spiral, because spiraling wasn't productive. The assessor layout had given me 4 public entrances: the main south entrance, the north service entrance near the food court loading area, the east wing ground level entrance, and the Sears Anchor West entrance. From my position in the east wing service level, the ground level entrance was theoretically reachable through a connecting passage if the internal doors were open. I checked camera 11. 17 chairs in the atrium now, up from 12. I wrote it down. The connecting passage was open, the internal fire door resting all the way back on its hinge, and the passage ran about 60 feet before ending at a set of double doors that the layout said opened into the east wing main floor lobby just inside the ground level entrance. The sourceless light was present here too, thinner and lower than on the retail level, but present. I pushed through the double doors and into the lobby and stopped. It was different from the upper level. The upper level had been a preserved version of open and ready, gates up, merchandise in place, the surface appearance of a functioning mall held in suspension. The lobby looked used, not by a trespasser sleeping rough in an empty building, used deliberately, by someone who came here regularly and had arranged things with intention. Against the left wall sat a folding chair, the kind you find at a church rummage sale, metal frame with a canvas seat. Next to it was a cardboard box, broken down flat, placed on the floor like a mat. On the box was a flashlight. Not my flashlight. I had mine in my hand. This one was older and larger, the wide rubber grip model that was common in the 90s. And it was on, sitting on the cardboard mat with its beam aimed at the ceiling, putting a steady circle of yellow light on the drop tiles above it. A working flashlight in a building sealed since 1998. I stood looking at the folding chair, the cardboard mat, the aimed beam, and something about the arrangement of it struck me as prepared rather than abandoned, as though someone had set out a place to sit and wait and see. I thought about the pen in the Auntie Anne's cup, current manufacture. Someone had been inside this building not once, but repeatedly, and with purpose, and they had left things behind. Camera 1 on the tablet showed me the south entrance exterior, empty parking lot, Route 9 beyond the glass, and nothing else. I went to the folding chair and sat down because my legs had been registering their objections for the better part of an hour, and I needed to think clearly. The east wing ground level entrance was directly in front of me, about 20 feet, standard commercial glass double doors in an aluminum frame. Through them I could see the east parking lot. My truck wasn't there. It was on the service road behind the west end, so even if I got out through this door, I had a long walk ahead of me. But it was an exterior exit, and I wanted it open. I went to it, pushed the bar. It opened, just opened, clean and easy, and the night air came through, and I stood in the doorway with 1 foot inside and 1 foot out. The cold air on my face, and I breathed in asphalt and spring and the specific absence of that sealed moment smell. I told myself I could leave now, walk to the truck, drive home, work the problem from a distance. I went back inside. I know. I went back inside because of the flashlight. Because someone had placed a working, charged flashlight in a specific location inside this building, positioned with its beam pointing up, in exactly the spot where someone entering from the east wing service level would naturally arrive. That was deliberate. That was a message. And if the flashlight was the first part of the message, there might be a second. I looked more carefully at the cardboard. A broken down beverage case, 48 count, folded with the printed side down. I tipped it with my foot and checked the printed side. Just the branding. Nothing written on it. But beneath it, on the concrete floor, was a photograph, face down. A rectangle of white photo paper, protected from the concrete by the cardboard. I picked it up. It was a photograph of Hargrove Mall. Exterior shot, east wing entrance, daytime, taken from roughly the east parking lot angle. The building looked newer in the photo, the cars in the lot suggesting sometime in the late 80s or early 90s, before I had any relationship with this place. Written across the bottom in ballpoint pen, blue ink matching the pen upstairs, was a single sentence. "She is not here the way you think she is here." I read it 3 times, sat back down in the folding chair, and read it a 4th. Someone new. Someone who had been inside this building multiple times, who had left a photograph and a flashlight and a pen, knew exactly why I was here and what I was looking for. And they were trying to tell me something about the nature of what I would find or wouldn't find, or about the difference between those two things. First thought, who? Second thought, find them, because the photograph and the flashlight and the pen were all recent, which meant whoever left them was alive and reachable. Third thought, check the tablet. Camera 9, corridor, empty. Camera 7, east wing upper level, empty. No figure near the Auntie Anne's counter, and the counter itself showing nothing. No shapes, no pretzel pieces, which was impossible because I had looked directly at those pieces with my own eyes 15 minutes earlier, and they were real. Camera 11, atrium, 22 chairs. I counted twice. Camera 1, south entrance exterior, empty lot. Camera 4 I'd almost forgotten about. East wing upper exterior, covering the outside of the building rather than the interior, and it had never shown me anything but dark roofline and empty pavement. When I checked it now, it showed me the east parking lot from above, the same lot I'd just been looking at through the glass doors in front of me. There was a car in it, an older sedan, lights off, parked in the lot. I looked through the glass doors at the east parking lot. Empty. I looked at the tablet. Camera 4 showed the car clearly. One of those two things was what was real, and both possibilities were deeply unsettling. I turned the photograph over again. She is not here the way you think she is here. And the understanding I'd been building for weeks finally assembled itself, fully. The mall was operating from inside a moment, running its open logic from 11:47 on October 9th, 1998, still in the part of its cycle where it receives, and being received into something frozen at the moment of its own interruption, something that never moved past that instant, meant being inside it, the way a sound is inside a room, rather than the way a person is inside a room. Present, but not in a way that could be reversed or extracted, not waiting to be rescued. Here in some other sense entirely, one I didn't have a clean word for. I took the photograph and the flashlight, left the folding chair, went back through the double doors and the connecting passage toward the service level. I had made a decision. I was going to find whoever had left those things. Not tonight. Tonight I was going to get out of the building, get to my truck, and work the problem methodically. The flashlight had a brand name and a model number, traceable with patience. The photograph could be dated more precisely. The handwriting on it was individual and specific, and that would matter if I ever had something to compare it to. I got back to the loading dock door and pushed the bar. It swung open without resistance, clean and easy. The night air came through, the smell of asphalt and spring, and I stood in the doorway for a moment thinking about the weight that had held the door an hour before, and that now was simply gone. I decided I wasn't going to stand there thinking about it. I was going to walk to the truck. I was almost to the fence line when my tablet showed me something on camera 11. 22 chairs, pulled from 22 tables. And in one of them, the one closest to the East Wing access corridor, a figure sitting down. Small, wearing light-colored clothing, facing away from camera 11's angle. Facing toward the East Wing access. Facing towards the corridor that connected to the stairwell, that connected to the service level, that connected to where I was standing in the dark, outside the loading dock. Facing toward where I had just been, sitting in a food court chair in a dead mall at 2 in the morning, with a particular forward lean, weight on the forearms, head slightly down, patient. I knew that posture. I had seen it 10,000 times over 17 years of being her brother. I stood at the fence line holding the bolt cutters and both flashlights, and the photograph and the tablet, and I looked at that feed for a long time. Then I looked at the loading dock door. Then I went back inside. I want to be honest about that second return, because dressing it up as courage or love or anything clean and purposeful would be a lie. And the whole reason I'm telling you this is to not lie about it. It wasn't courage. It wasn't even really a decision in any deliberate sense. like weighing and choosing. It was more that the part of me which had been driving slowly past that building for 25 years finally ran out of road. I had been moving toward this moment since October 9th, 1998, and the momentum of that was its own kind of gravity, and I just stopped fighting it. Back through the loading dock, through the service corridor, through the connecting passage and the double fire doors, back into the East Wing lobby where the folding chair sat, and the flattened cardboard box lay with nothing under it. I looked at the tablet. Camera 11. The figure still there, still in the chair closest to the East Wing access. Same posture. I went through the access corridor. It ran parallel to the service corridor below and connected the lobby to the atrium through a short passage with a dogleg turn, a quirk of the original build I'd noted on the assessor layout without fully appreciating until I was walking it. Because the dogleg cut your sightline completely. You couldn't see the atrium until you were nearly inside it. So I heard it before I saw it. What I heard was nothing, and I know that sounds like it doesn't qualify as hearing anything, but in that building the absence of sound had a texture and a direction. It wasn't empty silence, it was full silence, weighted, present. The atrium was right around the turn, and it was absolutely quiet, and the quiet had mass. I came around the dogleg into the atrium. The space was larger in person than measurements convey, large and open, rising 2 full levels to a skylight roof that in 1998 would have admitted daylight and was now a dark rectangle of marginally lighter darkness above everything. The sourceless light was present here too, the same low greenish-gray evenness, and in it the food court seating area was clearly visible. 22 chairs, 22 tables, 1 chair pulled out from each, 21 of them empty. The figure in the chair nearest the East Wing access was facing away from me, toward the center of the atrium. I was behind it, and to the right. I stood there for a moment that stretched considerably longer than it actually was, and then I said her name. Carrie. My voice landed flat in the atrium, absorbed the same way my footsteps were absorbed, the space not doing anything with the sound I gave it, just taking it. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, didn't respond in any visible way. I walked toward it, the same reluctant leg slowness as before, and I came around to the side of the chair, and then the front of it, and I stood there and looked at what was sitting in it. It was her, and it wasn't. I need to stop here and be careful, because this is where language fails me, and I've spent a lot of time since trying to find words that fit, and I'm not sure they exist. What was sitting in that chair had Carrie's face and Carrie's posture and Carrie's light-colored clothing, the Auntie Anne's employee polo, yellow with brown piping, which I recognized from photographs of that night that I'd looked at more times than was probably healthy. All of that was present. But it also had a quality I can only describe by saying it was like looking at something that existed precisely in space, but wasn't anchored to time. A film frame, a single still image of Carrie, fully rendered and three-dimensional and present in the chair, but not moving through time the way I was moving through time. She wasn't breathing, not in the way of something dead, in the way of something for which breathing didn't currently apply. I stood in front of her and looked at her face. It was 17. It had been 17 for 25 years. That landed somewhere I'm not going to try to describe. I said her name again. Nothing. I looked at the tablet. Camera 11 showed the atrium, and it showed me standing in front of the chair, and the chair on the camera feed appeared empty. Whatever was sitting in it was not visible to camera 11 or camera 9. The figures I'd watched on the feeds for weeks had never been in the same place at the same time as where I was standing in real time. and now I understood why. The cameras weren't showing me the current atrium. They were showing me the 1147 atrium, the frozen moment version, and the things that existed in that moment were visible on the feeds, but not to my eyes in real time, except when they crossed over somehow. What I was looking at in the chair was the inverse. Visible to me, but not to the cameras. Present in one layer, but not the other. The boundary between the two states wasn't solid. The word I came back to later was permeable, and it had been getting more permeable every night I watched. Every night the chairs multiplied, and the figures shifted, and the camera swung itself toward the pretzel counter. Something had been thinning. I thought about the demolition schedule. 11 weeks when I'd started. 10 now, maybe, given how long I'd been inside. I thought about what happens to something that exists inside a frozen moment when the physical structure around it comes down. Whether the moment collapses with the building or whether it gets loose somehow. Whether demolition was the right outcome or the worst possible one. I crouched in front of the chair until I was at eye level with her face, and I said, "Okay, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me, or if hearing works the way it normally works right now, but I'm here, and I was supposed to be here 25 years ago, and I'm sorry I wasn't." The atrium was silent. Nothing moved. I said, "I don't know how to get you out of this. I don't even know if out is a direction that exists from where you are. But I need to know if there's something I'm supposed to do, because someone else has been in this building and they left me a message. And the message said, 'You're not here the way I think you are. And I think that means I can't just carry you out of here. I think I've always known that. I think I drove past this building for 25 years knowing it on some level. But I needed to see you. I needed to see you and tell you I'm sorry.'" The sourceless light shifted. Just slightly, the way light shifts when something passes through it. Not brighter, not dimmer, just differently distributed for a moment, as though something had moved between me and wherever the light originated. And then, quietly, from the direction of the East Wing access corridor behind me, I heard footsteps. Real footsteps. The kind that make actual sound, impact, and echo both. The sound a person makes moving across a hard floor in the normal world. Not the absorbed flatness of my own steps in this building. These bounced. They had the quality of someone real in a real space. I stood up and turned around. A man came around the dogleg into the atrium. Late 60s maybe, heavy work jacket and jeans and boots. White hair, carrying a flashlight nearly identical to the one I'd taken from the lobby. The same wide, rubber grip model. He stopped when he saw me, looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "You found the photograph." Not a question. I said, "Who are you?" He said his name was Gerald Pratt. He'd been head of maintenance at Hargrove Mall from 1991 until the night it closed. After that, he said, he'd been coming back. Not every night, not on a schedule, but regularly for 25 years. I said, "You left the flashlight." He said yes. He'd seen my truck parked on the service road 2 weeks earlier and understood immediately that whoever was watching the building was there with a genuine reason, not just looking for something to photograph and post somewhere. He'd come back the following night and set up the lobby, the chair, and the light, in case I came in through the East Wing service entrance, which was the way he always came in. I said, "You've been inside this building regularly for 25 years and never told anyone." He looked at me with the patience of someone who has had 25 years to make peace with an impossible situation. And he said, "Told them what, exactly?" He was right. I let it go. He walked to the food court seating area and looked at the chair where the figure had been, then looked at me and said, "She was here tonight." I said yes. "She's been here every night since October 9th, he said. He'd seen her many times over the years, never clearly enough to put in any kind of report, but present, the way she'd been present in the chair. He'd identified her from the employee photographs in the mall office, which he'd taken the night of the evacuation before anyone thought to secure them, because he'd known from that night that something had happened in a way that official processes weren't going to address. I asked him what he thought had happened. He sat down in one of the food court chairs and was quiet for a moment. Then he said he thought the mall hadn't really closed that night. He thought it had closed a long time before that, and none of them had known it. The building had been running its open logic for years before 1998. His exact words, which I had independently arrived at in my own head, a coincidence that unsettled me. Carrie had been the last person received before something in the structure gave way and prevented the cycle from completing. He said, "What happened to her isn't the worst thing." I know that sounds wrong, but the worst thing would have been if the cycle finished. I asked him what that meant. He said he didn't know precisely. 25 years of trying to understand it, and the best he had was that the mall in its broken state was still doing what malls do, receiving people and not releasing them. What Carrie was inside was that logic applied to something more essential than commerce. The not releasing part was the same as the not progressing part, the frozen at 11:47 part. And it was wrong and terrible, and also possibly the only reason she was still present in the world, in any form at all. I thought about my mother dying in 2011, still waiting. I thought about the demolition schedule. I asked Gerald about the demolition. He went still. He said that was why he'd left the photograph. Not because he thought I could extract Carrie, but because he thought I needed to understand what I was dealing with before the building came down, and that whoever witnessed what happened when it did should be someone who understood what had been inside it. He was 68 years old, he said, and uncertain whether he'd be physically capable of being there when the time came. He'd been looking for someone with a reason that went deeper than curiosity. He'd seen my truck and recognized a reason. I sat down across from him and we talked for hours. He knew things about the building that weren't in any record I'd found. Its history, before the Hargrove family sold it to the developer, specifics about the East Wing, a particular spot in the service corridor where the geometry of the space did something he'd noticed in his first week on the job and never found an explanation for. A place where the air moved differently, where sounds behaved differently, where he'd always had the sense, he said, that the building was paying closer attention. He thought it had always been that way, long before the mall existed. He thought whatever the mall had been built on top of had its own open logic, and the mall had simply given it a shape it could use. We left together around 4 in the morning. Gerald knew every exit and which ones the building would cooperate with on a given night, and he led me out through the north service entrance without any resistance at all. Just out, clean, into the cool dark of early May. We stood in the lot, and Gerald looked at the building and said the cameras. He'd known about the system for years, but never had the technical knowledge to access the feeds. He said he was glad someone finally had. Then he said something I've thought about every day since. He said, "She let you see her on the cameras before she let you see her in person." He said that wasn't nothing. That was her working with what she had. I drove home as the sky began to pale at the edges and sat in my driveway before going inside, the photograph in my hand. She is not here the way you think she is here. And I thought, okay. But she is here in the way she is here. And that is something. That is not nothing. I watched the feeds every night after that. Talked to Gerald twice a week by phone. He was methodical and calm in a way I found grounding. The way people sometimes get calm after sitting with something terrible for long enough. Not because they've made peace with it, but because panic stopped being a useful tool a long time ago. The atrium chairs continued to fluctuate, not always increasing. Some nights, fewer than the night before, which Gerald said he'd observed on his own visits. A rhythm he'd noticed, but never fully decoded, possibly tied to weather or season. Camera 9 stopped showing corridor figures about 2 weeks after I went inside. Just empty passage from then on. Camera 7 still panned at 2:23 every night and stopped at the Auntie Anne's counter, which was always empty on the feed now. Not present in the 1147 layer, present in the other one. 8 weeks before the demolition, I filed a formal request with the County Historical Preservation Office, arguing that the building represented a significant example of mid-century commercial construction and requesting a delay pending structural survey. Long shot, and I knew it. It bought 6 weeks. The Preservation Office responded to the application partly because I knew what I was talking about architecturally, and partly because I was the kind of persistent that bureaucracies occasionally yield to. 6 weeks wasn't enough time. I'd known that going in. But I also knew by then that stopping the demolition wasn't what I was trying to do. Gerald and I had talked it through enough times to reach the same conclusion. We didn't know what the demolition would do, and had no way to know, and preventing it permanently was beyond either of us. What we could do was be present when it happened, carry an honest understanding of what had been inside the building, and not let that understanding disappear into a file drawer somewhere. I was there the morning the equipment arrived. East lot, my truck. Gerald in the passenger seat, both of us with coffee. 7:45 on a Tuesday in late September. The sky that specific clear blue September sometimes achieves when it's at its best. The equipment came in off Route 9 and set up on the west end by the old Sears anchor. The preliminary work was fencing and barrier setup, nothing structural. The building just sat there looking the same as it always had. On camera 4, the east parking lot looked exactly like the east parking lot I was sitting in. Same, matching, no ghost car, no displaced layer, just the lot and the fence and the equipment, all of it present in the same moment for the first time since I'd started watching. At 11:47 that night, I was still in the lot. Gerald had gone home at 9, his knees giving him real trouble, and I'd made him go. Alone in the truck with the tablet and my coffee, and the building dark in front of me. At 11:47, the sourceless light came on inside the building one last time. I could see it through the east wing ground-level glass doors, that low greenish-gray glow. And on camera 11, the atrium was lit, and the chairs were there. 26 of them pulled out from 26 tables. Camera 9 showed an empty corridor. Camera 7 lit the east wing upper level. All the gates rolled up, and the camera panned at 2:23, the way it always did, and stopped at the Auntie Anne's counter. The counter was empty, clean, nothing on it at all. I sat with that for a long time, the bare counter in that wrong light. I thought about Carrie pulling apart her break-time pretzel scraps, the specificity of that habit, and I thought about the fresh pieces I'd seen the night I went inside. And I thought that maybe the empty counter wasn't absence. Maybe it was completion. Maybe that particular thing was finished. I don't know. I'm not going to make it neater than it actually is. At 3:17 in the morning, the sourceless light went out. Not gradually, simply off. And on all 5 feeds simultaneously, the image quality changed. The live greenish-gray replaced by something different. Something that looked like very old footage, degraded and static-edged. And the timestamps, which had read 11:47 p.m. October 9th, 1998 every night for weeks, changed. All 5 of them rolled forward, not to the current date and time, to 11:48, 1 minute past the frozen moment. Then all 5 feeds went dark, and when I refreshed the addresses, there was nothing there. No response at all. Not even the distant knock of that first night. Just network silence, the kind that comes from something genuinely finished, rather than something waiting. I sat in the lot until the sky started to go gray. Then I drove home. I called Gerald and told him what I'd seen. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "1 minute." She got 1 minute. I said, "Yeah." He said that was more than he'd thought possible when he first started going back to that building in 1998. I said I thought so too. The building came down over the following 3 weeks. I was there for most of it. Nothing unusual happened. No equipment failures, no anomalies. Just a building being taken apart the way buildings are taken apart. Loud and incremental and final. Gerald came for the last day. We stood in the lot and watched the last section of East Wing facade come down, and then we drove to a diner on Route 9 and talked about other things for a while, the way people do after the main thing has been said, and there's nothing left to usefully add to it. I still have the photograph. She is not here the way you think she is here. It sits on the table next to my laptop, where the quad display used to run every night. I look at it sometimes. I think about what it means for something to be present in the way it actually is present, rather than the way you need it to be. And I think about how long it took me to understand the difference. And I think about 1 minute, 11:47 rolling to 11:48, whatever that cost, and whatever it was worth, and whether it was enough. I think it was something. I think it was not nothing. That's all I've got.